thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are diving into how to choose a GPU cloud provider for maximum return on investment. Now, there's a lot of noise out there, and we're taking half an hour this afternoon to just really focus on what matters when it comes to scaling AI, and that's your infrastructure decisions and making sure that you're doing it in the right way, the most efficient way. So my name's Rebecca, and I am going to be guiding you through this conversation today. I'm joined by two excellent speakers. We have Nick and Salam. Hi, guys. Before we get going, I'm going to ask the guys to kind of introduce themselves. So Nick works with AI teams, helping them navigate the kind of infrastructure maze, and Salam is joining us with a bit more of a commercial and strategic lens. So we're set for a very good conversation. So Nick, could you dive in and just give yourself a little bit of a hello and a background? And I heard you were at Raise recently, so any interesting insights from that?
Yeah, hey, thank you for having me. My name is Nick. I've been working for around 3.5, nearly 4 years, designing, deploying, and managing GPU cluster and infrastructure solutions for teams trying to build and then launch AI into production. And I'm currently in Paris. I've been at Raise for the last few days, where it's been very intense, a huge amount of energy in this space. And at the conference, there were around, I would say, 10 different cloud providers. So very on point for what we're going to be talking to today in terms of how do you find the one that's the right fit for you.
Amazing. Nice company. Salam?
Hey guys. So I was double checking actually. I was nearly 15 years in the AI space. Started off as what was a quants guy, but essentially what we call a data scientist now. But particularly been in the compute space for the past 7-8 years, doing massive amounts of deployment. So today certainly we'll share some of the good, the bad, and the ugly in regards to some stories and some cautionary tales in terms of what compute should be for you in your future. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what's a really great lineup between the two of you. Looking forward to it. So what we're going to run through today, we've marked out kind of half an hour, so you all know for your calendars, but we're going to leave a bit of extra time at the end for any Q&As. So we're going to run through the common missteps in GPU cloud selection. Sounds like the guys have probably got a few of those to be sharing with you all. The technical checklist for evaluation, what to go through. As you know, if you signed up to this, you'll be receiving a 12-step checklist for making that decision as well. So even diving deeper into it rather. Service and support, how important that is when you're making your decision. We're going to be looking at the commercial landmines, maximizing that return on investment, as the title tells us. Real world case studies and benchmarks, and then we'll be running through a quick summary of what we've discussed. So without further ado, over to you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks. So jumping right into it, teams can often be overwhelmed by the amount of choice that there is in the market these days. And we've worked with a huge number of businesses, high-scale startups, people just beginning, to help them make good decisions and build solutions that work for them. And most of the time, we're not the first people that they've spoken to. We may not even be the first people that they've dealt with on infrastructure. And in our experience, we've seen a lot of missteps or mistakes that people have made in the decision-making process. And we've kind of summed it up to a top 3 here. And this is going to cover what we're going to be talking about today. So I'd say the top error we've seen people make in this space is jumping at the lowest GPU hour price. Now, I know that's a bit controversial because obviously cost reduction is important, but you need to really consider when an offer might be too good to be true and the consequences this can have for you. So we're going to jump into that a little bit later on. We're also going to be looking into when teams don't fully understand the level of support that their infrastructure provider is going to give them, and where gaps in support can have knock-on impact on your day-to-day life. And then finally, we'll also be looking at when teams don't fully validate technically the clusters that are being delivered. You really need to make sure that you understand the roots of everything that's being delivered. Getting really into the details. When we talk about clusters, it's easy to think that they're all copy and paste. Every provider is offering the same thing, whereas in reality, each cluster out there is very unique. They're all going to have their benefits and potentially their quirks. And if you don't fully acknowledge this ahead of time, then yeah, this can have some problems for you later on down the line. So these are the kind of the three main things we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about the technical validation you need to do, understanding your cloud provider's support, and also going into the commercials and understanding how different commercial structures can have pros and cons. And I thought we'd best we kick off with the technical side of things. So when you're looking at a cluster, you've determined you need compute, and you're now going, right, where do I get it from? There are lots of different cloud providers out there, all offering clusters that on the face of them could look similar, but in reality, there's always going to be these little differences that can have a massive impact on your workloads. So let's run through some of the things you need to validate straight off the bat. First of all, you need to decide if the location of your compute is important to you or not. Now, for a lot of people, say you are training models on data that does not need to be kept within a sovereign compute cloud, as in it can just be transferred to and from borders. There's nothing confidential there. Then this may not be much of a factor for you, and you can cross this off your list straight away. You can just look for the most cost-effective, most appropriate cluster anywhere in the globe, and you're good to go. However, if inference is your end game, so if you want to use the same compute cloud for your production environments, or if you need something sovereign because you're working with public sector or incredibly confidential data, then the location of your cluster is going to be extremely important. Now, this is going to rule out a huge number of providers straight away, but you need to factor this in early before you go too far down the rabbit hole, so you're not investing and validating a cluster that is going to always be inappropriate for your use case based on where it is. Now, once you've kind of crossed that off, you then need to go into the in-depth details of the hardware that makes up that cluster. You need to dig into the specs of the node. Do you need specific types of CPUs? Do you need specific core counts, or do you need to enable things like TDX for confidential computing, which can only be done on certain Intel CPUs? Do you need AMD processors because this lines up with what you're using in your current environment? Do you need ARM chips? These are all things that you need to understand straight away and request from your provider early on. Similarly for RAM, do you have specific RAM requirements? Do you need extra CPU nodes? Do you need things like tensor nodes or QPUs? There's a lot going on the hardware that you need to dive into. Salam, you're a bit of a storage guy. Do you want to talk about how they might need to evaluate storage in their clusters?
Yeah, so I would take it in terms of working backwards. So work on understanding the workloads that you have now, what workloads you may have in the next 3, 6, 12 months. And then you can evaluate not necessarily the brand of what kind of storage you need, but absolutely what priority those workloads are from a storage perspective. Because some of those workloads may involve just pure LLM, text classification, things that don't require image rendering or video rendering or computer vision. And those are completely different requirements. So the likeliness is that you'll stumble across priority lanes. So what is going to be fast storage that you need, medium pace storage, and also standard or slow as part of your kind of pool system. So it's not going to be just a pooling of your GPUs and your compute, but also at that storage level. So it's about working backwards. Because if you're just going to go back to looking at the underlying cost of a GPU, you're already 3, 4 steps behind. Trust me, I've got the war scars to merit for it. So I would strongly recommend take it the reverse way. Look at the workload, understand the ultimate things that you need to run those workloads, because it could be a mix between H200s, B200s, and other new generation chips that you need to be able to run, not just on a singular one. So what I would say as a headline to that is be a smarter buyer. Don't allow yourself to be one-dimensional and thinking, I just need to go for a low price. get the most out of your workloads in regards to storage and in regards to priority lanes to get the most out of your compute for your workloads. That's the way that I would position that.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this also then it also kind of ties into how you want to consume your compute as well. Do you have something? So typically when we're deploying clusters, there's four kind of key ways that we'll set something up for a client. You typically be there sort of something like bare metal. We can virtualize it. We can deliver it with Kubernetes, or we can set up some kind of job scheduler like Slurm, an incredibly popular solution, especially around startups that are spun out of academia. All of them have different pros and cons, and it's really down to you guys to decide which is going to be the best fit. Have you built, say, an in-house Kubernetes setup that you just want to deploy onto any infrastructure you bring online? If so, then bare metal is probably the best fit. If you've not built anything, but you want a solution that allows you to dynamically control your complex infrastructure and get creative about how you allocate jobs to available resources, Kubernetes could be a really good fit. But obviously, it takes a little bit of getting used to. So you might want to ask your provider to set this up for you and give you some pointers and managing it along the way. Alternatively, you might be managing multiple teams and you want to have a really refined system for allocating resources based on deadlines or project priorities. In which case, Slurm can be a really, really effective, quite unsung tool that you may want to look into adopting. We love Slurm here at CUDO. We've built some really intricate setups for clients that have helped them improve resolution times across entire business functions. And then onto observability, Salam, this feels like something that you probably know a little bit more about coming from your space.
So I was going to say, you've got your baseline here, folks. So let's give you some key things here to think about in terms of serious value add, where it comes a bit beyond just the baseline of a really good Kubernetes layer and your cluster workload management using things like Slurm, which are really important, no doubt. But the way to get just serious value on top is the ability to look at how everything is performing from a utilization perspective, from an idle perspective. And if anyone on the webinar is experienced enough to deal with big cluster management, you'll notice that when it comes to the failures of clusters or a failure of a GPU, commonly, I would say about 50 to 60% is based on networking. It's actually not the underlying silicon itself. So having an ability to do observability throughout the landscape, from software all the way down to power, is going to give you invaluable insights where you need to start thinking about how can you proactively look at your observability throughout the whole stack. So you can anticipate where things are being over provisioned, where things have come, where there's certain anomalies, where certain workloads weren't expected to be run. Those are kind of things that will be invaluable, not just to the underlying folks that you've got managing these particular workloads, but ultimately your pocket in terms of the amount of cost. So you want to be able to have things that are observable, i.e. observability, but not reactively here. You want to start looking at things proactively. So there is a little bit of predictability in regards to learning how to observe throughout your stack. Now, the uniqueness there is networking. So just have that in the back of your mind. And networking is a typical thing that comes on quite often as a failure for that. So just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for going through that, because I think, hopefully everyone listening in, they'll understand, okay, there's quite a lot of touch points here. That's, it's really valuable to spend the time on all of these and more as we go through it to make sure that you are making the right decision and that you're maximizing that decision. Everything is clear to you. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've seen quite a few more people join actually. So any questions as we're going through that, drop it into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We're going to run a quick poll as well. So in a minute you'll see kind of flash up on your screen, what's your biggest infrastructure pain point? We really want to make sure that we're adding value to you guys who've dialed into this. So have a quick vote. Not too deep. Let us know where it is that you're kind of experiencing that right now, just so that we can cover it and we can make sure that we're really bringing to you what your focuses are at the moment. So you can see quite a few votes coming in, which is great. I'll give a few more minutes. Don't be the odd one out. Quite a few different people dropping in their votes now. We'll see in a second where we've got to. I have to give it a few more seconds. Biggest infrastructure pain points, drop that in. If that's triggering any more questions, again, into the Q&A. We'll come back to it at the end. Awesome. Thank you so much for voting, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Okay, great. I think we can drop off the poll there. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for all your votes. As I mentioned, we'll be running over that at the end and making sure that we just go over where people are kind of experiencing the pain points. I'm sure we'll have a lot of crossovers and we'll probably learn from each other on that point. So we're going back into the presentation. And I just service and support. So I'm going to let you jump straight into this one.
Yeah, so this is the unsung hero when it comes to who you want to be selecting in regards to your compute provider, or just generally, whenever you purchase something as large as compute for your workloads, you want to make sure that you are not just getting the standard elements that come out of support. So whether it's 24 hours support, 7 days a week, are you working with real people that understand the workloads that you're dealing with? Are you just working with an infrastructure person? That is critical, especially when you've got frustrations where you can't kind of navigate your workload on the underlying compute that you're trying to use. If you've got someone that can provide you a place to speak to a community, to speak to them individually, and that you know that you've created, or they've created, a trusted advisor of sorts to you and the way that you're using your compute, you're naturally going to want to work with that person again and again. So from a support perspective, or some would call it customer service, CSM, so customer success management, the idea is how much value is that underlying vendor providing you when going through this normal kind of idea of purchasing compute. Now, everyone needs to step up their game now. It's no longer about being driven by AI or whatever. It's actually, have you got someone real that understands your problems, understands what proactively you need to be doing with potential problems coming up? Because ultimately that just relieves a lot of the headaches and a lot of the concerns that you would have with your typical GPU failures, or your further or future GPU purchases. So I would not undervalue that. That is something that I would take absolutely seriously. And it's war scars that I've certainly felt from customers that have come to us just wanting the ability to provide support, nothing else. So it shows how invaluable support can be for you when reserving GPUs or reserving compute for your workloads.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the way that we see support is that the best support is where the team feels like an extension of yours. It's where the guys managing your support will help you with everything from, the little things like adding users or mounting storage, all the way to setting up, large orchestration tools or helping optimize workloads for a truly quality experience. The best support teams will structure partnerships in a way that remove the lines of responsibility and get fully hands-on with ultimately helping you achieve your goals. And this can be a really amazing thing to experience, both as the provider and as the client. We've worked with teams that have amazing ML engineers, but they don't have a background in Linux or sysadmin. They are struggling to manage systems. They're hitting roadblocks with tasks like adding users. But when you get an environment set up for them exactly how they want it, their training models with GPU utilization rates of 90 to 100% for days at an end. They're clearly incredible at what they do. They just need a little bit of help in setting up the environment. The way I always describe ML engineers is the same way I describe Formula One racers. Put Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari and he'll set a lap record. It doesn't mean he knows how to build the Ferrari. It's the same case here, which is give these guys a cluster or give these guys infrastructure that's built and set up exactly for what they need to do, and they'll produce some amazing products from it. It doesn't mean they know how to build and manage the infrastructure, and that's where you kind of want your cloud provider to pick up the slack and allow you to focus on doing what you need to do.
I think the pro tip that I've got there for everybody is make sure before contracting, speak to that support team. Make sure that you've got a good gel between your engineering or DevOps with theirs, number one. Number two, understand that they genuinely have the best interests of your workloads being successful rather than just a bog standard compute contract where they just care about keeping uptime, whatever. You want them to be vestedly interested in what you're trying to deliver. And then ultimately, you want to go back to this trusted partner or trusted advisor that we talked about. If that support team does have that DNA, then that should be a massive plus for you to have before contracting with those types of vendors.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really it's really important, especially when you're working on those projects. You're always changing. You want to make sure that you've got the right team around you to help you maximize what you're building, basically. So I guess bringing over, talking about the financial side of things and it being the most expensive decision you possibly might make from a commercial lens. Slam, do you want to just chat about what's important here?
Yeah. So for the startups in the room, let's just talk about three elements, right? Number one, don't overcommit on your long-term contracts, particularly if there's complexities around burst capabilities that you want. Just don't overcomplicate, especially because you've got a balance between your OPEX, etc. You want to make sure that those contracts are as simple as possible. But what I would emphasize is have a capacity plan of your workloads. What I mean by that is give an idea, get a best guess of what your workloads will be like if you were to scale in the next 3, 6, 12 months. Don't go anything beyond that, because you want to make sure that you're kind of budgeted for that. And the one thing that I would reiterate, which becomes serious in terms of value for a lot of customers that don't recognize this, but if they recognize it straight away when they start to contract, is the DevOps element. You won't need, if you're working with a really good partner, you won't need to necessarily hire such a big amount of DevOps folks, like AI engineers, GPU engineers, electrical engineers, networking engineers, etc., because that just starts to become a hemorrhaging cost that you never anticipated. Work with the partner that understands that, and work with a partner that really truly says, okay, well, instead of you needing to go and hire X amount of people in regards to headcount, say like 100, 200K, you want to work with a partner that understands that and says, actually, without spending all that headcount cost, we'll provide you tooling from our side, from us as a vendor, to be able to deliver you significant reduction in your DevOps. But there are other things outside of that you can seriously save in terms of resourcing, whether it's time, external contractors. There's even things that you may have not even noticed, like indirect or variable costs. So all of those elements need to be in consideration when you start thinking about how you maximize your investments, and particularly if it's going to be long-term leases of compute. You want a partner that truly understands that, and in the forefront of your agreement, it's all about providing you the best value. I think one thing I was talking with Nick earlier was it's like a price per performance, essentially. Get the best return on those contracts so you can see immediate value.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to keep in mind, is that the real metric is price per performance and not price per GPU hour. And this also ties in something we raised earlier, which is jumping at the lowest price based on price alone without any other kind of validation. That ultimately what you've got to remember is that when setting up clusters, there's a very significant cost to setting up and running GPUs at scale in an environment that's suitable for them. So if you've seen a price that's dramatically below the market rate, you've really got to ask, how is this possible? And use some of the validation techniques we've discussed already in the session. Now, it could be that the provider has just found a new way to be very, very economically efficient, and it could be a legitimately great deal. However, the more frequent case we see is that the provider has saved money in either the data center they've set up in or the support that they offer. And both can have some really negative consequences if if you don't realize this until you are trying to train models, until your model is in inference and it's being used in production, something breaks, and then the ramification costs of fixing that can be much greater than the amount that you saved by using that person or that provider. So just make sure you go into it with eyes open and validate before you sign.
Yeah, great. There's kind of positives and negatives on both sides of those things that you highlighted. I mean, you talk about DevOps, Salam, and there was actually a good reference that you were mentioning earlier. Would you like to dive into that?
Yeah, so some really good examples are some of these new software companies that use a significant amount of compute. So folks like Replit, Cursor, Lovable. Lovable was a great one because a few years back they only had 7, 8 engineers, and even though their compute costs really had a significant steep in terms of cost, they were really smart on how they purchased their whole infrastructure and also their framework. So if you look at them now, they're still at the point a few months ago where they're actually scaling in regards to headcount costs. But their engineering team is still low because they truly understood how to get the best out of their compute. How do they do that? They understood their workloads. They understood the traffic that was coming onto their website. And then ultimately, they knew the value that they wanted to deliver to their market. And ultimately, they had a great capacity plan of what the right compute was for the right workloads that they had. So it's about being a smarter buyer. And the idea here is you can use companies like this now to really get an understanding of how to be better at using compute for your ecosystem. And Lovable is just one out of hundreds.
Yeah.
I would strongly recommend having a look at how they did their way of growth for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a really valuable kind of example to look into, especially just about making that right decision. Now, Nick, I'm just going to I feel like we could make this webinar about 3 hours, I think, if we wanted to. But Nick, I'm going to bring you back into just this kind of conversation around like just summarizing it, but really the conversation with yourself, like what do you need to be asking basically when you're coming to this buying decision?
Yeah, I think it's just a quick summary of things to consider going in. It's just really wrapping up what we spoke about and opening up the way for Q&A. Yeah, just remember when you're looking to contract, when you're doing this evaluation, whether it's in a short-term notice, you need GPUs now, or you're planning ahead, just run through the points we've got here. Go through these technical validations. Is the location important? What are the specs? Do these guys understand what I need from storage? Can they deliver it? And how do I want to consume this? Do I want them to set up Kubernetes for me? Do I need to learn? Am I going to do this all myself? Have I got something I've developed and works for me? You understand the support side. Meet the support guys, meet the head of the team. Ask yourself, do you trust them? Do you think that they're going to follow through? Ask them to kind of validate. Do they have 24/7 support? Can they provide some reports on how they've been recently? And then commercially, just try and step back and get a whole holistic view of the picture. What's the catch? Is the pricing too low? Is it legitimately a good deal, or do I need to, is there something that is hiding for me? How do I maximize the flexibility of my contract terms? Can I get shorter terms, and would that be a better fit for me? And ask yourself, if there's additional support, what does that save you in terms of streamlining your headcount and allowing your team to focus on growth? Yeah, I think that's everything. Let's jump into some of the questions we've seen flying in.
Well, as as promised, the poll results. I think let's just jump into those. So, do you want to have a guess, Nick?
I honestly couldn't say. I wouldn't surprise me if it was networking, but yeah, jump it. Just what are the
So
features?
yeah, I mean, so 78% is cost, followed at 44% with scaling limitations, and then we have network and hidden fees following that one. So it's interesting, you know, you were talking to the cost, you know, you were literally just, you know, kind of talking about the cost there, but we did have some questions come through as well. What tool, you know, you mentioned tools. So what tools help with network observability, Nick?
I mean, so we've got a set of in-house tools around network observability. It's about just being able to ping your network and understand when links are flapping, so you can proactively look to fix them as opposed to waiting for a job to fail because they've gone down. Salam, you might actually have some good experience in this as well.
Yeah, I do. So I think that question's from Joshua, Nick, right? Hey, Joshua. So I've had the war scars of this, but let's just be, if we're looking at
Maybe it's worth repeating Josh's question just so everyone can.
yeah, I think Joshua said, what would you do at a very large scale, 8,000 GPU? Let's not even do it at 8,000. These kind of things happen from 1,000 above. So where mean time between failures is few hours, and you have to do a kind of 100,000 hour job or 1,000 hour job, right? So the idea is that typically these kind of workloads are going to be training or fine tuning. So without question, checkpointing is going to be your number one port of call. So you can implement frequency, you can do incremental checkpoints, and enable job restarts to save last point rather than say starting everything from scratch. Now that's the basics, right? Then you've got to look at fault tolerances. So leverage your fault tolerances. So your design workloads have to be fault tolerant, whether you're using RAID, clusters, or whether you're using Kubernetes native, OpenStack, OpenShift. You've got to be kind of aware of that. And then what I would strongly recommend, and what I've done previously, is proactive monitoring. So apply predictive failure detections, whether it's thermal, whether it's hardware logs, just to help you migrate and kind of preemptively restart certain workloads, especially high risk ones. And the last one that I remember is redundancy. So if feasible, only if it's feasible, use active to active or active to passive redundancy for those critical parts of the job. So that could be the first few hours to the medium part of those, or so it depends on the workload. And that's why I really want to emphasize, look at the workload rather than the underlying technology that runs the infrastructure, and that will help you maximize your parallelism techniques, your automated recovery, and all of those kind of components. But checkpointing is where you start. That's what I 100% recommend.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks for that. We had another question in here. Nick, did you want to jump to that one?
Where's this one?
Do you provide servers with NVMe storage?
Yeah, NVMe storage is the standard in the cluster world. You do get sort of spinning disk setups for backups, and I think slow storage, it's also becoming more and more prevalent. But in terms of the base, so the base on node storage will always be NVMe. Then you have things like VAST and Weka, which will be running on network storage, and that is almost always NVMe as well. So, have you seen anything like that run on some of the stuff that's not NVMe?
Yes and no. So NVMe, it will be appropriate for certain workloads, especially ones that you just want to get off the ground quickly. But then I would strongly recommend, if you're starting to do large scale deployments that are training bases, there are some great solutions out there, whether it's Weka, VAST, NetApp, Dell. Again, I wouldn't look at it in terms of just, I know I keep on emphasizing on this webinar about the type of workload. Actually, it goes a little bit beyond that now. When it comes to the right type of storage for your server, it's also based on your priority pools. So if you've got things that require fast deployments, then there is a certain batch of storage that is required for that. If you're looking at standard deployments, that you're okay for things to be deployed in 5 or 6 days, then there's another catalog of type of storage solutions for that. So I would certainly look at it working backwards, like we said before, but categorize what your best fast storage is, what your best medium storage pace, medium pace storage is, as well as your standard. And usually it's quite a mixed pool. However, providers can provide a whole stack between those pools. It's really based on a mix between your workload and your priority pooling. So that's the two things that you've got to figure out before deciding whether it's NVMe as your main port of call, or whether you need a mixed portfolio of storage to be able to deploy.
Thank you. Thanks for that. It's really, really sharp insights from you both. Just to give people, something really great to go away with. The poll results came.
We've got one more question. If we're going to jump into that one.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So Ravi asked, how do customers typically engage with CUDO? Is it just on contract terms based, 3, 6, 9 month commitments, or is it purely dynamic as needed by the hour? The answer to this one is actually both. So it really depends on what you need. We've got an on-demand platform that's got a huge number of GPUs, all the way up to H200s, available with like second-by-second billing. If you are looking for Blackwell architecture, this is still only available on monthly or like term reservations. Similarly, it really comes down to a question of what you need and the scale you need it at. If you need, say, like 2000 H200s or H100s, at the moment, that's on a contract basis, but we can do things as low as like monthly or even potentially lower contract lengths. But we do also have a huge on-demand pool for resources at scale, things like H100s, H200s, L40Ss, A100s. The diversity of GPU available is huge, and you can go check that out now on our website.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And there's another question come through from Joshua, actually. Salam, if you want to jump in and answer that one.
Yeah, so I'm just reading it. What solutions, I'm not going to read all of it, but I get the gist. So what solutions are you putting in place to mitigate or fix those failures so the workload can progress at scale? So again, I'll give you a top line of what you need to consider here. And I'm only going to assume you're also still talking about large clusters. So we talked about checkpointing. There are things around resubmissions as well. So if you've got job resubmissions, that avoids things like full restarts. That's just quite important. Then you've got isolation and quotas. So you want to use strong kind of job isolation. So when you've got certain resource quotas and pre-flight checks, essentially, you want to limit the impact that it has on, say, what you term as reckless users, which is fair enough. And then when I talked to you previously on your last question about proactive analysis, in this particular case, you want to have failure pattern analysis. So it's not just understanding the root cause, but also real-time monitoring, and then the ability to kind of capture fixes like things like hardware faults or software bugs. There are things around degradation. There are things around user education and certain guardrails, but those are just safety mechanisms, really. So I would say the big three are going back to checkpointing and resubmission, isolation and quotas, and then on that proactive analysis piece, start looking at more failure pattern analysis. And that would hopefully get you kind of mitigating any risks around reckless or poor users. A little bit less direct in terms of that kind of wording there.
I think there's also some tooling. So just this week at Raise, there are more tools coming online that can be used for allowing jobs to progress, even in the face of hardware failures. These are solutions that we're always looking at internally. I would say one that could be looked at is there's a company called Clockworks IO who are producing some really interesting stuff in this space as well. I'd recommend checking them out.
Nice. I think we've see if we've got another question in. So in the poll, 78% of people here highlighted cost as one of their biggest pain points. So question to both of you. So I'll come to you first, but what advice would you give then to that person who's voting on cost? Like, what do they do now? What's their next best step if they're already in?
I think I'll relate it to something that happened this week. So some of you guys may be aware of the Raise Summit where Nick is right now. There's been a lot of talk now about truly understanding, I think Nick highlighted it about price per performance. But the common theme that people are realizing, and some of them, the folks, especially at the Raise Summit, are noticing, is people care about business outcomes. So with the type of things that you're running in terms of your workloads, how does that translate to the ultimate business outcome of your business? So let me be very clear what I mean. If you're a CTO and you're looking to reserve compute, you've got a P&L that you've got to manage, and ultimately your P&L impacts the company's P&L. But if you've got a workload that has a direct impact to users of your business, that you want to increase the amount of consumption from your users, you've got to consider what type of compute enables you to get the most about your business users' consumption of your platform. So there are so many things that people are talking about in these, not just Raise, but there was the VivaTech conference that recently happened as well, where a lot of customers are panicking in a sense where they're saying, I need to get the most about what I'm going to reserve next. Can you guys help me on getting the most so I can reduce my bills, or I can get more consumption on my platform, or increase the amount of users where it's not going to overutilize my GPU consumption? So it's all about business outcomes really now. And in terms of your mindset, that should really be that driving factor, especially with what customers, partners are all talking about this year. So definitely something to put in the front of your mind.
Yeah, that's a really nice kind of like shift actually, in different kind of lens to like bring onto it, and people are thinking about that. Nick, what would you say to people that are coming to you with cost? You know, it's obviously on everyone's mind.
It really depends. Yeah, if the aim is to reduce costs, it's understanding what actually is going to help move the needle for them. If it's reducing costs, there's always ways to be competitive. I think it's just analyzing what actually can be done in the current market, is understanding if it's better to have contracts that are if it's better to have contracts that are flexible as opposed to costs that are lower. You know, you can get low costs on like a 2-3 year commit, like it'll massively reduce the cost, but then you have a much longer commitment, which is something we'd only really advise in certain use cases. We would probably recommend people to have like the more flexible terms. I think it's really a case of understanding what they need, how they need it, and then structuring a deal in a way that it can allow them to be sustainable in their growth whilst also giving the resources they need to grow.
Nice. Well, thanks so much, guys. It's really interesting kind of insights. I'm glad that we kind of got to everyone's questions, and we we kind of addressed some of those poll points as well. You know, the conversation obviously doesn't have to end here. You'll be receiving, everyone who's joined in, you'll be receiving an email with the links to the content that we've promised you, and also a link to book a call in and keep the conversation going with the guys. If you've got more questions around this, then please do complimentary calls to ask any questions that you want and to dive deeper into the topic. So thank you so much for your time. Over and out, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Both Salam and I are on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, reach out and we'll happy to talk them over with you. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.